I wanted to make this quick little video to discuss some of my thoughts about the ATACMS missile, which the United States has for some time wanted to supply to Ukraine. For those who are not aware, the ATACMS is essentially a short-range ballistic missile which is fired by the HIMARS missile launcher. The much acclaimed HIMARS missile launcher, which Western mainstream media has been hyping up to no end. Up until now, the United States has only supplied Ukraine with the GMLRS munitions, which are essentially these smaller rockets, 227 millimeters in diameter. They are guided rockets. They have a maximum range of around 70 to 80 kilometers, and one HIMARS launcher can fire and carry up to 6 of these at a time. Now, what separates these GMLRS munitions from the munitions that are fired by more classical multiple launch rocket systems, such as the Soviet and then Russian BM-27 Uragan, are that the HIMARS fires guided munitions. That is to say that these GMLRS rockets, they are guided and they are very precise, much more precise than your classical munitions which are fired by the classical multiple launch rocket system. And it is this one quirk which has allowed the Ukrainian armed forces to use the HIMARS missile system to what has so far been a notable degree of effectiveness. The HIMARS has been used on a number of occasions to destroy various munition depots, as well as some objects of infrastructure which were being used by the Russian military, and the most famous of these by far is the Antonovsky Bridge, which crosses the Dnieper River near the city of Kherson. And the Antonovsky Bridge has been damaged by salvos of these GMLRS munitions a number of times over the last month or so. We're basically seeing this rinse and repeat cycle of these missiles being used to damage the bridge to the point where it can no longer be used, and then the bridge gets rather quickly repaired, and then it gets bombarded again. Now, what all of these targets have in common, the munitions depots, the Antonovsky Bridge, is that they are all located within this 70-80 kilometer range from the front line, from where Ukraine can use these HIMARS launchers to fire at these targets. And this fact has led a lot of people who comment on this war, whether they be military experts, random commentators like myself, or foreign policy magazines, to come to the conclusion that if the US were to equip these HIMARS launchers with the bigger, longer-ranged ATACMS missile, then the HIMARS can be used to strike at targets within Russia itself. And very often, military targets inside Crimea, especially the Kerch Strait Bridge which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland, often comes into focus in these discussions. And of course, the prevailing logic here is that because the ATACMS missile in its more modern modifications has a maximum range of around 300 kilometers, and all of these targets are within that 300 kilometer range from the front lines, they can thus be targeted and either damaged or destroyed much in the same manner that the GMLRS munitions have up until now succeeded in destroying other Russian military targets which are closer to the front lines. Now, the reason that I am making this video is to dispel this belief which I personally think is just a myth. And to put it simply, the reason that this can't be done, at least not as easily as some people imagine, is because the Russians have a lot of air defenses, especially around these critical targets which could be targeted by longer-ranged missiles. To put it simply, the shorter-ranged munitions which were fired by the HIMARS, that is, the GMLRS, have only succeeded in destroying their targets because they were, first of all, fired in salvos, and second of all, because the Ukrainians have often used a variety of other similar ranged Soviet missiles in conjunction with these GMLRS munitions. It's important to understand here that any half-competent air defense system can deal with one or two rockets without any issues. To crack another side's air defenses, you basically need to overwhelm it, to fire more missiles at a target than those air defense systems are capable of intercepting. So, in light of this fact, what the Ukrainians would often resort to doing in order to crack these Russian missile defenses is that they would use the older Soviet rockets fired by the BM-27 Uragan, the BM-30 Smerch. Both of these, in their older Soviet modifications, are unguided, they are inaccurate, they don't pose anywhere near as much of a threat to their intended targets as the GMLRS munitions do, but their purpose would be to be fired in conjunction with these GMLRS munitions in order to distract Russian radar systems or simply to force Russian missile defenses to expend all of their interceptor rockets to take down these less accurate munitions so that the more accurate HIMARS missiles could then come in and strike their intended targets. And I think that it's important to note that even this tactic has not always been successful. There have been a number of instances where the Ukrainians would try to use this tactic, fire dozens and dozens of rockets in total, and all of them would end up being intercepted by Russian missile defenses. So now I think that it's important to answer the question, how does this translate to the potential of the ATACMS missile being used to strike at something like the Kerch Strait Bridge? Well, to put it simply, Ukraine has lots of Soviet-era rockets of comparable size and comparable range to the GMLRS munitions, so that it can use these in conjunction with the GMLRS to confuse or simply overwhelm Russian missile defenses. But Ukraine has nothing like the ATACMS missile. And unlike the GMLRS, the HIMARS cannot carry or fire 6 ATACMS missiles. It can only carry 1. There is also, of course, the heavier M270 multiple launch rocket system, a number of which, a small number mind you, have been delivered to the Ukrainian armed forces as well. These can carry 2 ATACMS missiles at a time, but what's the point of that when you can just use those same launchers to instead carry 12 GMLRS munitions instead? Of course, then there is also the matter of the ATACMS being a larger missile, which has a longer flight time before it reaches its destination, which has a larger radar cross-section, which means that it can be seen and tracked more easily and for a longer period of time. Basically, all of this translates to the fact that an ATACMS missile would be much easier to intercept than these GMLRS munitions. And lastly, I think that it's important to note that, according to the research I've done at any rate, an ATACMS missile has a warhead of something like 223 kilograms, which, as far as ballistic missiles go, is not very much. Of course, needless to say, this can inflict some damage upon something like a bridge, an airfield. It can definitely destroy a munitions depot, especially if that munitions depot is not well protected, if it's not located deep underground or something like that. But this one 223 kilogram warhead, 223 kilograms of explosive material, has less cumulative power than 6 GMLRS warheads, each of which carry something like a little less than 100 kilograms of high explosive material, 200 pounds if we are to be more precise. So, in other words, not only is the ATACMS missile much easier to intercept than a volley of the GMLRS missiles, but it also has less cumulative explosive power and is likely to do less overall damage than the 6 GMLRS munitions. At any rate, these are my thoughts. This is some of the information that I've been able to find while digging around, while researching these various weapon systems. Let me know if you agree with my analysis. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section. One last thing that I want to say about this topic is that any weapon system is, of course, a weapon system, something that is designed to fight in a modern battlefield and to kill. So none of this is to say that the ATACMS missile is a complete dud or anything like that. Any weapon system can be used to some degree of effectiveness, especially if Russian air defenses were to fail for some reason, which we have seen so far in this war. The reason that I am making this video, the overall point that I want to get across, is that the ATACMS missile is much less likely to inflict damage upon the Russian military than the GMLRS munitions, which have already been supplied. Which of course means that if Ukraine were to somehow acquire these ATACMS missiles, that would have very little direct impact on the military balance. It would certainly be much less impactful than the introduction of the GMLRS missiles some months ago. And this, in fact, is why I believe that the United States hasn't supplied Ukraine with ATACMS missiles so far, or at the very least, this is one of the reasons. The United States knows what's going on. The military of the United States, that is, the various generals and commanders, have a clear understanding of what's going on the ground in Ukraine, and they know that if they were to supply these ATACMS missiles, it wouldn't have a big impact on the war in general. But of course, the political ramifications of something like a missile strike on the Kerch Strait Bridge is a whole other topic that, frankly, I don't want to get into in this video. The reason that I made this video was to discuss some of the technical characteristics and the potential uses or lack thereof of the ATACMS missile in Ukraine.